Hi, I'm Jade. I signed a 169 billion contract, sealed it with everything I had. But when the cameras rolled, my father stepped in, smiled for the press, and called me my sister's assistant. He said she was the future, that I just followed her lead. I didn't argue. I just pressed one button and watched everything he stole disappear. Ever been erased by your own family and forced to smile through it? Stick around, you might see what silence can really do. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment. Let's talk. I don't know what silence is supposed to feel like after $1 billion win. But I'll tell you what it felt like that morning. It felt like swallowing glass, slow and deliberate, with a smile on your face, because 40 people are watching. The morning had started with triumph. 3 brutal months of negotiations, late nights, voice gone hoarse from pitching contracts, cross-cheated line by line till my eyes blurred. But I'd done it. I had just closed the $169 billion deal that would take our company global, and today was the celebration. I was standing near the boardroom podium, notes in hand, crisp black suit freshly pressed. The projection behind me read, "Welcome to the future." My heart thudded, not out of nerves, but from pride. I'd earned this. I wasn't here because of my last name. I was here because I outlasted, outworked, and outmaneuvered every obstacle thrown at me. And then the door opened. He walked in 20 minutes late. My father, Richard Belgrave, CEO, founder, patriarch, still holding court at 73. He didn't acknowledge me. His arm was looped with zennias, and she looked like she'd stepped out of a corporate fashion catalog. White suit, red heels, hair slicked back like some startup guru fresh off a TED Talk. People shifted, cameras swiveled. "Sorry, we're late," Dad said, tapping the mic as if the delay were a minor glitch. Traffic was murder, but we made it just in time for a historic announcement. I blinked. Announcement. He smiled at the audience. This moment, this extraordinary deal wouldn't have been possible without the brilliance, the vision, the heart of one woman. My hand tensed around the clicker. This wasn't in the agenda. Dad turned slightly toward Zanaya. "Let's give a round of applause to my daughter, Zanaya Belgrave, the future of Belgrave," and applause started, unsure at first. A few board members clapped politely. Some looked over at me. One man dropped his pen. And of course, my father chuckled as he patted my shoulder like I was a secretary, handing him coffee. None of this would have been possible without her loyal assistant, Jade. The room went still. Assistant 40 people, including clients who'd flown in from Europe press. Investors, my own team. They saw my name on the deal. They knew who brokered it. But in one sentence, he'd wiped me off the map. The screen behind me still flashed my initials. The documents in everyone's folders had my signature. But perception is power, and my father had just handed that power to Zanaya. I didn't say a word. Zanaya stepped forward, took the mic, like a princess handed her crown. "Thanks, Daddy," she giggled. "This has been a journey, and I'm just so honored to lead the next chapter." She mispronounced the client's name, called one executive David when his name was Donald. Tried to quote the contract and stumbled through the numbers like she hadn't read them. I sat back down slowly. My legs moved on autopilot. The room tolerated her. That's what it was, tolerance. But tolerance is quiet. It doesn't shout. It lets the lie roll until it collapses under its own weight. As she fumbled, I placed my work tablet on my lap and flicked it on under the table. The screen lit up. One document was already open. Code I'd written myself back when I built our internal security system. Trigger clause, lockdown, still dormant, still waiting. The kind of clause that, if activated, would suspend all external access-freeze communications. Put the company's top-level operations under administrative review under my key. Back then, they told me I was paranoid for writing such a clause. Today, it felt like insurance. I looked at my father, his smug expression, hands behind his back. Like a king watching his heir stumble forward, I looked at Zanaya, her fingers trembling slightly, jaw tight. When she glanced at the board and caught one director checking his watch, and I thought, maybe it wasn't a racer, maybe it was exposure. They always called me her shadow, I whispered in my head as the applause started to thin. Let them see what it's like when the sun goes out. I didn't tap it yet. Not yet, but my finger hovered, and when I tapped that one line, the system didn't just blink. It vanished. The moment I tapped the screen, I didn't flinch, I didn't blink, but every monitor around the room did. At first it was subtle, barely noticeable. The slideshow behind Zenaya froze mid-transition, cutting off the word legacy. The screen pulsed once, then again. Then black, a beat passed, then another, and then it hit all at once. Every display behind the press panel went dark. The presentation screens that were streaming to international offices collapsed into static, followed by an ominous, unauthorized access banner in thick red font. The digital wall showcasing our clients, billion-dollar branding turned into a digital void. A warning tone echoed from the side projector. Sharp robotic sterile Zenaya looked around confused. At first she kept smiling, trying to ad-lib. I'm sure our tech team will have that back up in just a sec. Her voice cracked on sec. Her eyes darted to me. She looked like a child who had forgotten her lines at a school recital, searching for the teacher's face in the crowd. Executives whispered across the table. Someone from the Paris branch leaned forward. Is this part of the pitch a simulation? Another muttered, is this a security test? And then the contract portal locked with a high-pitched tone. One by one, the executives' tablets began blinking. The same message. Access denied. Signatory breach detected. I stayed seated. I didn't say a word. I simply closed my tablet. No rush, no apology. Zenaya's hands trembled as she reached for the mic, but it let out a shrill feedback shriek and went dead. She looked down at the lifeless podium like it had betrayed her. I could hear my father's heavy footsteps before I saw him. He stormed down the side aisle, his face red and eyes blazing. What the hell is going on? He barked. Nobody answered. All eyes were on me. I stood, slowly adjusted the sleeve of my blazer, and offered the room a small, polite nod. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to thank you all for being here. Unfortunately, the remainder of this session has been postponed until further notice. The silence was deafening. Only the soft buzz of failing electronics filled the space. My father's voice cut through it. Fix it, Jade. Right now, I met his stare without blinking. You'll need someone higher than the assistant for that. And I walked out. I didn't glance back. I didn't rush. Just past the stunned faces, the murmurs, the silent questions hovering in the air like smoke after a controlled burn. By the time I reached the hallway, someone whispered behind me. Soft, unsure. Did she just kill the deal? No one answered. They all just moved aside like the sea, parting for a storm they didn't see coming. The server wing was colder, quieter. As I entered the internal compliance suite, a glass-walled control hub tucked into the second floor. The lead officer, Mallory Chen, looked up. She already knew. We've seen this code before. She said, no judgment in her voice. You tested it 2 years ago, I remember. I nodded and I documented it. Internal Clause 9. 22 Contingent Lockdown on Leadership Misrepresentation, signed and ratified. Mallory tapped her keyboard, bringing up the archived audit logs. She found it instantly. It's legal, fully binding. I know the file was small, but its weight could crush empires. It had been buried inside a routine infrastructure update 5 fiscal cycles ago, marked as fail-safe contingency sync. No one had bothered to read the fine print. Not even the CEO himself. It was an elegant structure, one line triggered by biometric, confirmation by fingerprint, and one private passcode. The clause instantly froze all internal systems and rerouted legal ownership of the signed contracts into an independent holding entity. That entity, Maris and Violin Private Group, a name my father had nodded over in a long document back when he was too busy counting projected revenue to notice. He'd signed the lock over to me, and now the whole foundation of their performance, of their billion-dollar celebration, stood on my name. The press wouldn't hear about it today, but they would soon enough. I wasn't planning a meltdown, just a shift of gravity. From behind the glass, I saw Zenaya pacing frantically. Phone pressed to her ear, her voice muffled but sharp. Try the backup drive. Call DevOps. Try again. No one could access the back end. She turned, saw me watching. Her expression flickered. Confusion, then recognition, and finally something closer to fear. It lasted only a second. Then she looked away. My father appeared again at the end of the hallway, speaking to two legal advisors. His voice was tight with forced calm, an internal error. We'll get it fixed. Someone overreached. No, someone simply reclaimed what was already hers. I turned to Mallory. Full lockdown is in place. She nodded. Not a single byte moves without your release. And Jade, it's airtight. This was masterfully done. I gave a faint smile, not out of joy, just acknowledgement. I didn't do this to destroy what we built. I did it to remind them who actually built it, because for years, I'd watched them take my work, slap a prettier name on it, and parade it around like it was always meant to be hers. Because at every family dinner, I was the afterthought. While Zanaya got congratulated for my patents, my mergers, my nights without sleep. Because even now, they still thought they could humiliate me in front of the world, so I let them. And then I took everything back quietly, cleanly, without yelling. As I turned to leave the server room, Mallory spoke again. You know this will trigger fallout. I nodded once good. Let them feel the cold. My heels echoed against the floor as I exited the control wing, past the stunned employees, past the silent doors, past my father's frozen empire. And just like that, everything they built stood on ground I quietly owned. I didn't go home that night. There was no point pretending anything was still normal. After that room, the stairs, the silence, the panic. I stayed downtown, booked a quiet suite overlooking the skyline, and watched the lights flicker across buildings. That used to mean something to me. Now they just looked hollow. By 6:45 the next morning, I was back at the office parking lot. Not in my usual spot, but farther out where the sun hadn't hit the pavement yet. I preferred it that way, cool, quiet, out of view. I had an hour before the board arrived. My plan was simple. Audit the internal damage, issue a silent memo, and let the leadership scramble on their own. But fate apparently had a different opener in mind. I hadn't made it past the turnstiles when I heard the shouting. She's in the car. Someone call 911. Two security officers sprinted past me. A few interns gathered near the curb, blocking the view. Something about the stillness in their posture, like they were too afraid to move closer, made me instinctively quicken my pace. The luxury coupe was parked crooked, engine off, windows barely cracked. Her shoes were still on. Zanaya slumped behind the wheel, hair matted against the leather headrest, makeup streak across her face from what had either been sweat or tears, or both. Is she breathing? Someone asked. A maintenance worker tried the door. It opened with a soft click. That sound, that small mechanical sound, cut through me. Sharper than the wail of the approaching ambulance. She must have been here all night. One of the junior managers whispered, still in that blazer from yesterday. I didn't step in. I stood to the side, one hand still clutching my tablet, watching paramedics lift her from the seat. Her skin looked too pale against the navy suit. Her wrist dangled as they laid her onto the stretcher. No one noticed me, and maybe that was the point. In truth, I felt nothing, or at least that's what I told myself. My chest was quiet, my mind sharper than ever. They loaded her into the ambulance within minutes. Someone asked if I was family. Yes, I said flatly. No one asked more. By 8:15, I was at the hospital waiting in a hardback chair near the nurse's station. The room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. A television played muted news loops. Still no coverage of the real outage. A nurse handed me a clipboard. You're listed as emergency contact, she said. The doctor will need to speak with you soon. I nodded, barely glancing at the forms. 10 minutes later, a man in blue scrubs approached. She's stable, he said, but we'll need to keep her for observation. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously. Any known history of stress-related illness. I stared at him for a moment, unsure what to say. Was public humiliation by your own blood considered a pre-existing condition? She's been under unusual pressure lately, I replied. Folding my arms, he nodded sympathetically. Happens more than people realize. especially in families where expectations are high. I didn't correct him. Just let the silence hang. They allowed me into the room. Once she was hooked to the stove. Her hand twitched slightly when I walked in. Her lashes fluttered. I waited near the window, not beside her bed. Watching someone you resent breathe slowly mechanically makes you rethink things. Not necessarily feel more, just sort through what's left. Her lips moved slightly, then faintly. I wasn't ready for that room. I turned my head. For any of it, she whispered again. It was all too much. For a second, she looked like a child again. The same girl who used to cling to the piano bench pretending she was a prodigy while shoving me away from shared sheet music. The same girl who at 15 pushed me just hard enough down the stairs to secure the solo recital. And Mom said I tripped. Why weren't you looking where you were going? Jade, but here she was now hooked up to a saline drip. Voice cracked, pride gone, and I didn't say a word, just watched her with an expression I couldn't quite define. Not pity, not quite satisfaction either. More like confirmation. Eventually I stepped out. The hallway was quiet except for the low hum of vending machines. I leaned against the wall, staring down at my shoes. My thoughts weren't about Zanaya anymore. They were about Dad, about the press release he sent out that morning, framing the outage as a rogue systems error triggered by an internal glitch. A glitch, not a clause, not a contract. Reclaim a glitch. So that's how he wanted to play it. I walked slowly to the waiting room, found a corner seat, and pulled out my tablet. I wasn't surprised to see alerts already flooding in. Some staff had begun leaking falsified internal messages, ones making it look like I'd sabotaged the system out of personal vengeance. One even suggested I'd threatened Zanaya. They wanted a villain, I could play one. But this time, I wouldn't just whisper my defense in locked rooms, I'd drop it in plain sight. Data logs, timelines, digital trails, not accusations, proof. The system I built didn't lie, and unlike their stories, mine didn't need rehearsing. So I opened my private folder, typed 2 lines at the top of a new document. If they wanted a scapegoat, I'd give them one with proof. They thought I'd crawl away quietly, let them sweep the outage under some rogue assistant headline, and go on sipping their celebratory bourbon. But I wasn't built that way. I didn't come this far just to be someone's convenient mistake. By 7:30 a.m., the office was already buzzing. I stepped out of the elevator and felt the shift, the subtle hush, the heads turning only to quickly look away. Something had dropped. I slipped into my small office off the executive wing. The moment I opened my laptop, the company-wide memo popped up. We regret the system disruption caused by an unauthorized override during yesterday's press event. A full internal review is underway. No signature, no accountability, no context. But the part that stung my name wasn't in it. At all, not even as a footnote. I wasn't Jade's strategic operations director. I was a shadow with a red stamp, expendable. I clicked over to the media dashboard. There it was, splashed across tech blogs and business headlines like wildfire. CEO's assistant triggers system failure during 169B deal assistant. As if I hadn't written the clause they misused. As if I hadn't saved this company from legal ruin more than once. They erased me again. I sat still for a moment, letting the burn settle. Then I reached into my top drawer and pulled out the encrypted drive I'd secured last year. The one labeled only with a black sticker, Timeline 37 files. Every change, every signature, every suspicious access log. I plugged it in, entered the passphrase, and just like that, the receipts lit up my screen. At noon, I stepped into the back conference room, windowless, quiet. Only 2 chairs were occupied, Cassandra and Min, 2 IT leads, who'd helped me on a few compliance reviews before. They didn't owe me anything, but they respected rules. Not royalty. I need you to verify these entries. Cross-match system activity from the last 72 hours. Then go back and pull every override request from the last fiscal year. Min raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of noise, Jade. I leaned forward. Make it public. No commentary, just timestamps and truth. Cass hesitated. This will rattle a few trees. I nodded. That's the point. It's all legal. It's all theirs. They exchanged a look, then Min nodded, pulling the drive toward him by 3:15 p. An anonymous Twitter account under the handle of Compliance Archive posted 4 images. Just 4 first screenshot of the clause I'd written. Submitted to the board, watermarked with the legal review timestamp. Second, an access log from Zanaya's device, showing multiple failed attempts into a restricted compliance folder. Third, metadata on her override request, filed at 5:44 a.m. 6 hours before she even claimed to be in the building. Fourth, my father's digital signature approving the override a year ago. No hashtags, no commentary, just timeline in case memory fails. It didn't take long. By late afternoon, whispers floated down the hallway like dust in sunlight. I passed the cafe station where 2 junior staffers stood stiff. One muttered, "She wrote that clause herself." The other glanced nervously in my direction. No one said it out loud, but something had cracked. Not loudly, but definitely. In the elevator, I saw the receptionist skim her phone, then slowly look up at me, eyes searching. I didn't give her anything. The quiet didn't feel like rejection anymore. It felt like calculation. Even my father, when I passed him near the executive suite, didn't speak. He glanced at me, blinked, then turned into the stairwell. No greeting, no glare. Just a pause. Silence used to humiliate me now. It signaled something else. They were recalculating. That evening, I made tea instead of dinner. Too much adrenaline for food. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing the agenda for Friday's emergency board session. I read every line slowly. Item 4, review of operational oversight policies. Item 6, confirmation of clause. 14b, transfer authority. Item 9, discussion of emergency succession protocols. I smiled without humor. They really buried it under innocuous language. But I'd buried something deeper years ago. That clause I filed, it didn't just protect the contract. It triggered a dormant clause in my grandfather's charter, one requiring board reappointment if any senior officer breached compliance protocols. Zanaya had tried to override a protected system. My father had pre-signed her access rights, bypassing chain of command. Both were now under review and buried in the archives. My grandfather's signature confirming Jade Chastain as alternate trustee in event of operational misconduct. I leaned back, letting the weight settle on my shoulders, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I wasn't just cleaning up their mess anymore. I was finally unearthing the one they'd buried me under. I closed my laptop, glanced at the clock, 9:14 p.m. Tomorrow would be chaos. Friday would be war. I poured the rest of my tea into the sink and whispered aloud to no one, "Let them come." I've been waiting 39 years for this room. I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, because I wasn't. Not anymore, but because I needed every document, every clause, every possible counter-argument in my mind like a loaded chamber. At exactly 8:12 a.m., I stepped into the elevator, folder in hand, hair tied back, wearing the same charcoal gray blazer I wore to my mother's funeral, fitting. I thought something was being buried today. The doors opened to the top floor. The quiet hum of voices drifted out from the boardroom, not loud, but tense. I walked down the corridor, my heels striking the polished wood like a metronome, and stopped just short of the open door. At 9 a.m., I stepped into the boardroom, not as an assistant, but as the storm they created. The room went still. My father was already seated at the head of the long mahogany table, his fingers loosely steepled, like he hadn't just tried to erase me from existence. His expression didn't change when he saw me, but I noticed the flicker, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a subtle shift in his posture. He hadn't expected this version of me, not this calm, not this composed. Then it happened. 3 board members stood up, quietly, deliberately. One of them, Mr. Wessler, gray-bearded, formerly silent, walked around the table and stood beside me. "We've reviewed the trust activation documents," Jade, he said with no hesitation. "We support the motion to reappoint leadership based on the original charter." Another joined, then the third. No grand speeches, no applause, just a simple nod. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I stepped forward and took the chair at the head of the table. Across from me, my father didn't object. He just leaned back, chin lifted slightly, as if pretending this wasn't happening. I opened my folder. Before we begin quarterly reports, I said I'd like to enter 3 items into the minutes for transparency: the clause submission, the digital audit, the time-stamped override logs. Silence one board member. A younger guy, clearly rattled, cleared his throat. "Forgive me, but this isn't retaliation, is it?" I looked at him, not unkindly, but with the steadiness of someone who'd earned her right to be in the room. "No," I said. This was protection, and it worked. No one laughed. No one needed to. I handed the documents to the board secretary and moved on. I'd expected more resistance, maybe even a tantrum, but the room stayed oddly quiet. Eyes darted, sure, but no one raised their voice, not even him. Zanaya's chair was empty. My father shifted finally. "You've made quite a mess of our public image." He muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice had that old tone again, the one he used when I was 16, and accidentally outperformed his prized intern during a mock strategy pitch. Like I'd stolen something that was never supposed to be mine, I set my pen down. "No," I said softly. "I didn't make a mess. I removed the image you built and left only what's real." He looked around the table, and I watched something flicker behind his eyes again. Not anger, not yet, but the slow awareness of a man who realized the room no longer belonged to him. The meeting went on routine agenda. Items, numbers, forecasts. I barely needed to speak again, just watched. The rhythm of it settled over me like old music. Familiar, but this time I wasn't waiting on the sidelines with coffee as we reached the final items. I turned a page and spoke again calmly. "One final note before we adjourn," I said. "Per our founders' original charter, my grandfather's, there is a clause that addresses breach of ethical leadership. In such cases, asset control transitions automatically pending board confirmation." The air shifted. My father sat forward. "You wouldn't dare invoke that clause." I didn't flinch. I already did. He stared at me. I held his gaze, but not for me. I let the weight of that settle. I didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. The board members glanced at each other. A few leaned back, as if mentally preparing for what came next, because there would be more, much more. But for now, I simply gathered my notes, stood up, thanked them for their time, and walked out with the quiet power of someone who no longer needed their permission to exist. That night, a courier knocked on my door with a letter that changed everything. After the boardroom cleared and the final signatures were collected, I returned to my office alone. I didn't linger. I didn't even glance at the head chair I'd just occupied. My feet carried me on instinct, steady but careful, as if something fragile had shifted under the surface, something I couldn't name yet. The city outside had begun its quiet descent into dusk, that kind of stillness that doesn't make a sound but settles in your bones. I was halfway through unlatching my heels when I heard the knock. Not urgent, not hesitant, just deliberate. I opened the door, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery mix-up, but standing there was a man in a gray suit holding a small leather pouch in both hands like it was sacred. "M. Jadeworth," he said without asking. His tone was respectful, not overly formal. "Just sure." "Yes." He handed me the pouch, from Mr. Eldritchworth's private estate vault, hand-delivered as instructed. Before I could say thank you or ask anything, he was already halfway down the hall. I closed the door quietly behind me. My hands weren't trembling, but something inside me was. I knew that seal, the deep maroon wax, the crest pressed into it. A falcon over oak branches, my grandfather's mark. He used it on maybe 4 things in my entire lifetime. And I knew he hadn't sealed anything lightly, but I didn't open it, not right away. I placed the envelope on my desk like it was still warm, still breathing. Then I sat. I let the silence swell, let my eyes adjust to the fading light outside. I didn't need to rush. Whatever this was, it had waited years. It could wait a little longer. My fingers brushed the wax as my eyes caught on a photo near the edge of the desk. Me and him 12 years ago, my high school graduation. He had that smile, not the showy kind he gave cameras, but the quiet one reserved for rare moments. Moments like when he believed in something or someone. That memory opened a door in me I hadn't walked through in a long time. I was 18 again, sitting in the high-back chair across from his desk. His study always smelled faintly of cedar, and old paper books lined the shelves like soldiers. On that particular afternoon, he poured me tea instead of scotch. But the gravity in the room said, this wasn't just another grandfatherly chat. One day, he said, adjusting his cufflinks, this company will need clarity, not charm. He slid a document folder across the desk, the original Worth Charter. I looked at it, then at him. This isn't supposed to be seen until after he shook his head, until the moment truth matters more than politics, when you'll need it, not just want it. I asked him then, but why me? He answered without blinking. Because you already know how to listen to silence, and that's where power lives beneath the noise. Back in the present, I lifted the envelope. I broke the seal slowly, pressing the edges apart, like parting old truths. Inside a notarized document dated 6 years earlier, and a letter handwritten in that firm, slightly slanted handwriting I knew better than my own. The document was legal binding stamped. It read, in the event of reputational compromise or ethical breach within executive leadership controlling equity, shall revert to the designated heir listed in Addendum D, to be held until voluntary reappoint or legal succession. Heir Jade Graceworth. My lungs didn't tighten, they expanded. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt right, like something long bent had finally been allowed to stand up straight. Then I unfolded the letter. Jade, if you're reading this, then someone has finally made enough noise to require your silence no longer. You were never second. You were simply silenced. I regret every moment I allowed others to believe otherwise. You have the right not just to lead but to protect. And if this clause has activated, then protection is no longer a theory, it's necessity. Let truth guide your hand. Even if your heart falters, I trust you, no matter what they say. I didn't cry, but I did close my eyes, letting the weight of those words settle behind them. He never believed in my father. Not fully, that was clear now. And more importantly, he had planned for this moment. He'd foreseen the fractures, he'd drawn the line quietly behind the curtain, and then waited for me to find it. I stood, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, then returned to my desk and picked up my phone. I dialed my attorney. She answered on the second ring. It's me. I figured I saw the courier confirmation. Everything all right? I took a breath. File Article 27B quietly. No press, no leaks. Her voice dropped an octave. You sure you want to move on this? There's no going back. I don't need to win in public. Just in truth. There was a pause. Understood, I'll initiate filing in the morning. I hung up, and for a long time I just sat there, not triumphant, not even angry, just aligned. Then I read the last line of the letter again, softer this time. Let truth guide your hand, even if your heart falters. I folded it carefully and tucked it back into its envelope. Then I turned out the lights. The clock on the wall read 11:41 p.m., and for the first time in a very long while, I slept without clenching my jaw. That peace didn't last, because at 6:42 Mezzanaya showed up at my door. Eyes red, fists clenched. She knew I was still holding my grandfather's letter when the knock came. Not firm, not hesitant, just urgent. When I opened the door, Zenaya stood there, hair unbrushed, eyes swollen and red jaw clenched like she'd been biting her own tongue all night. She didn't wait for an invitation. She just pushed past me, fists balled, stepping into my living room like it belonged to her. She flung a folded paper onto the coffee table, the very letter I had filed. You had this, she said, her voice cracking under the strain of holding it together. You had this the whole time. I said nothing. You watched me walk into that boardroom like a fool. Let them talk over me, laugh. You let me. I didn't let you do anything, I said calmly. You humiliated yourself, Zanaya. I just didn't clean it up for you this time. She turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Don't you dare make this about me, but it is about you. It's always been. Her breath hitched, but she wouldn't sit down. She paced, instead the way she used to when we were kids, and she couldn't beat me in chess. Circling the room, pretending it didn't bother her. You think you're better, she snapped. Because you kept this little letter secret and played the long game. No, I said, folding the letter neatly and placing it back on the table. I think I'm tired. That shut her up for a beat. She dropped into the armchair across from me. Her hands trembled as they curled into her lap. You always acted like you were so noble, so above it, but you weren't. You were just waiting to strike. I leaned forward slightly. You want to talk about waiting? Let's go back. Her eyes darted toward me, cautious now. Remember 6 years ago, I asked, when you lost the duvet account, our biggest contract at the time. Dad blamed Karina, the junior assistant. She almost got fired. Zanaya stiffened. I knew it was you. You'd messed up the licensing timeline. I had the email receipts. You cried in my office for an hour, and I told Dad it was my fault. I didn't ask you to, she murmured. Eyes suddenly wet. You didn't have to. The air between us went quiet. Not heavy, just still. I was covering for you, I continued. All these years. Not because I thought you'd return the favor, but because I thought maybe you'd grow into it. She rubbed her hands together like she was trying to warm herself. I always knew you didn't think I could lead. I never wanted to see you fall apart. But I also couldn't let you burn the place down. Zanaya swallowed hard. Then why didn't you stop me? She asked softly. You were always so good at stopping everyone. I didn't answer that right away. Because the truth was, I was tired of stopping everything. Tired of cleaning up the wreckage that our father called leadership. She sat, back defeated. The fight had drained out of her bones. What was left wasn't rage. It was something quieter. He told me I deserved it all, she said, almost whispering. He made me believe I was born for this, that you were just there in the background. I nodded slowly, the assistant. She gave a sad laugh. Yeah, silence again. She looked down, then confessed something I wasn't ready for. I didn't even know how to access half the systems. I smiled through it. Memorized lines, rehearsed tech buzzwords. But deep down I knew I was just hoping no one ever asked the wrong question. Her voice broke. I sat back staring at her. Not with pity. Not with resentment, just understanding. She wasn't evil. She was a child, given the wrong script, and forced to perform for decades. And somewhere along the way, she believed the story. I stood and walked to the kitchen. I didn't ask if she wanted tea. I just made it. 1 cup for me, 1 for her. When I handed it to her, she didn't thank me. She just stared at it like it was the first real gesture anyone had offered her in a long time. I filed the letter, I said gently, but not to take you down, to protect what Grandpa built, what we almost lost. She nodded slowly, but you didn't tell me. No, I said, you would have tried to stop me, and you weren't ready to see the truth yet. Zanaya looked toward the window. Outside, the light was beginning to shift, sunrise brushing the edges of the trees in gold. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke again. You're still the assistant of everything I should have been. I didn't respond. Not because I agreed, but because I finally understood what she meant. She wasn't angry at me. She was grieving the version of herself she was promised and never got to become. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fix that for her. I barely slept. After Zanaya left that night, the house settled into that heavy, uneasy stillness that only comes after a storm. I stayed up replaying every word we'd exchanged, her voice cracking when she whispered, "He made me think I deserved it all." That wasn't something you say to a rival, that was something you confessed to a ghost you no longer believed in. By the time the first light touched the windows, I'd showered, dressed, and was halfway through a cup of black coffee. That's when the doorbell rang. A small unmarked envelope sat on the porch. No note, just a printed return address from HR at corporate. No courier. No knock, just there. I brought it inside and stared at it for a moment before opening it. Maybe part of me already knew what was coming. Maybe the timing was too perfect to be random. Inside were two files, one marked Jade Marchand, the other Zinaya Marchand. I laid them side by side on the dining table. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a strange kind of anticipation. Like something long buried was clawing its way to the surface. I opened mine first. There were pages missing. Performance evaluations that I knew existed had been blacked out or removed entirely. Projects I'd led had no author credit. One even had a red stamp. Filed under Team Leadership CZM, I flipped faster. Heart pounding, the combination from the Western Group in 2017 gone. My internal audit success in 2019 marked as team contribution. It wasn't just a few oversights. Someone had actively erased my name. Then I opened Zinaya's file. That's when I stopped breathing for a full 10 seconds. Her personnel history began at age 12. No academic transcripts from before that. No mention of her transferring schools 3 times. No reference to that year she was homeschooled after the car accident. It was as if her life before she turned 12 had been deleted or rewritten. Even more alarming were the internship letters I recognized. 2 of the name's mentors who were supposedly guiding Zinaya through college projects. They were dead had been for years before those letters were dated. One company listed as her internship sponsor didn't even exist. A fake website with a stock photo team and a disconnected number. Every glowing recommendation she had was built on air, and at the bottom of her file stapled as a footnote was something I never expected to see again. My leadership initiative from 2014, the one I spearheaded, nurtured, funded through my own networking. With my name scratched out in red ink, and in its place, Zinaya's. They'd handed her my legacy and called it a promotion. I pressed my palms flat against the table. It wasn't just Xenia who'd betrayed me. It wasn't just favoritism, it was systemic erasure. It was a deliberate campaign to reshape the narrative. Not just to lift her up, but to silence me. And there was only one man who could have pulled those strings that early, that thoroughly dad. He hadn't just chosen her. He'd buried me under her story. I stood up and walked into the hallway past the photo wall. There we were, Zinaya in her cap and gown. Dad beaming next to her. Zinaya at the company gala. Dad's arm proudly around her shoulders. Me just one picture. Me and Grandpa. My hand on his. Both of us laughing at something off camera. That was it. That was the only photo still untouched. I walked to the den, printed every document. I laid them out next to old photos, emails, calendar invites, even holiday cards. I made a line my line, and for the first time I saw how far it stretched and how often it had been crossed over. My voice was calm when I finally spoke, though no one else was in the room. He didn't just build her up, he deleted me from history, from my own story. A silence fell over the house again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, cleansed. I opened my laptop and forwarded both files, mine and Zinaya's, to the estate attorney. The subject line was simple for probate review. No additional comment, no explanation. I didn't text Xenia. I didn't call her. There was nothing more to say. I opened my leather-bound journal, one I hadn't touched in months, and wrote just one sentence. Let truth fall where it may. I've stood too long in silence. The next morning, I received the call. The will reading had been scheduled. 10 Sadurazar A. M sharp, but 3 names. 3 people who always assumed they'd be front row weren't on the list. The will reading was set for 10 Sandro A. Ma and 3 names weren't on the list. That morning, the city felt unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It's loaded like the air right before a thunderstorm. I got dressed slowly, careful not for vanity, but for presence. Simple navy dress closed. Toe heels, hair pinned back. No jewelry except Grandpa's old gold watch I hadn't worn in years. Not since the last time he called me his co-pilot. By the time I arrived, my attorney was already inside the building. She gave me a soft nod from the end of the corridor, then turned and disappeared into the room we'd requested. A wood-paneled conference space, clean but age-lined with legal books, and silence. I walked in without needing an introduction. My name was already printed on the portfolio, resting neatly in front of my chair. Zinaya was already there. She sat stiffly, clutching a purse. She hadn't sat down since I arrived. Her eyes darted up to meet mine, just once, then quickly dropped. Our father entered next. His shoes clicked across the polished floor, too loud for the space. He moved with that same effortless confidence he wore, like cologne, cheap but persistent. He didn't greet us, just sat down, like he belonged at the head of every table. The lawyer cleared his throat. "This will dated 3 years ago, revokes all previous documents and codicils," he began. He looked up to confirm everyone was listening. I was Zinaya, nodded faintly. Our father leaned back, already sure the next hour would reward him. The attorney continued, his voice even and deliberate, to the staff at Martian Industries. "A pension bonus totaling $1. 3 million shall be distributed among those with 10 or more years of service." Our father blinked to the Ridgeview. Veterans Home, a donation of $400. 000 in honor of Jules Marchand, U.S. Army. My breath caught. That was Grandpa's best friend from his platoon. I hadn't heard that name in years, and now he opened the second folder slowly to my granddaughter, Jade Marchand. Full controlling interest in the company bearing my name. Assets, operational rights, and executive decision power effective. Immediately, as of this reading, the room didn't go quiet. It froze. Zinaya inhaled sharply, her nails digging into the purse strap. My father sat forward suddenly, but didn't speak, not yet. The lawyer continued to Zinaya Marchand, a trust allocated for educational and rehabilitative purposes, in recognition of her challenges, and with hope for her clarity of future. Zinaya didn't move. Our father blinked again. No mention of him followed. The attorney turned the final page. "There are no further direct beneficiaries." Our father stood, adjusted his blazer, like a man still trying to own a moment. Already gone, he didn't say a word, he just left. Door opened, closed. The silence he left behind felt earned. Zinnia, still seated, whispered so low it almost didn't land. He still thought I needed saving. I looked at her for a long moment, not with resentment, not with pity. So did I. I said, "We didn't argue. We didn't hug. There was no applause. Only breath." When I finally stood, the room didn't feel smaller anymore. It felt even like the scales had finally stopped pretending they weren't tilted. Outside, the sky had turned a little overcast, but the air was warmer than it looked. I walked slowly down the courthouse steps, letting the sounds of the city replace the silence of the last hour. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't revenge, but it was done. My phone buzzed just as I crossed the street. One new email. Subject: Welcome, President Marchand. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I simply exhaled fully for the first time in what felt like years. And in that breath, something heavy lifted. Not disappeared, but shifted. Made room for something else. Maybe peace. Maybe beginning. Maybe just space. To finally be who I always was. I didn't scream. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge. What I needed was to know I was never invisible. He erased me from the room, but I rebuilt the room. They called me the assistant. But I never needed a title to carry the legacy. Sometimes the loudest justice is silence. Do you think I should have fought louder? Or did I do enough by simply standing?